Hey everyone, Zach here, also known as Steadfast. We're here today to talk about top meta decks in Lorcana. Since my first top 5 deck video over 3 weeks ago, there's been quite a lot of discussion, refinement, and discovery for Lorcana and its top decks. So with thousands of players playing even more online and in-person games, and several important tournaments behind us, where is the meta shifting now and what are the top 5 Lorcana decks? Let's dive in. First up, let me shout out a few great decks that just don't quite make the cut. Here are 3 decks that are very good and land just outside the top 5. And when I made my first top 5, many of the decks back then on my shortlist have been refined and improved and now find themselves in the top 5. If you want to know more about these decks and any other decks, let me know in the comments below and I might be able to cover them. And with those honorable mentions out of the way, let's get to the top 5. First up, we have a familiar and quite divisive deck, the Amber Emerald Lemon Lime Aggro deck. This was on my list last time, and I think it still slides its way into the top 5 because of its pure speed and effectiveness. And let's be honest, we can't really talk about a Lorcana meta without mentioning this deck. So many other decks are required to keep aggro decks like this one in mind when building and playing, and I think this is the best aggro deck available in the format. As many of you will already know, the key cards include early quest threats like Lilo, Flynn, and Rockstar Stitch, coupled with the ever-annoying Protective Cub Simba to bodyguard against turn 1 and 2 challenges. From that strong opening, the deck moves into even more threatening and annoying questing threats with Cusco, Mad Hatter, and Tinkerbell, and all 3 can be supported and sped up by just in time. Whether you love this deck or hate it, it's been around since the beginning of the first chapter, and we've seen a few updates, but the core of the list remains. My current and best list has a few small tweaks. First up, I like to run 2 copies of Hey Hey. He's a surprisingly good turn 1 play if you haven't found Lilo or Stitch, and he's a tech against other Amber aggro lists. His +1 strength support allows your turn 2 Simba or Stitch to take out an opposing Simba on turn 3. I like to run 3 Hades, who can return previously banished characters to your hand, often used to find and play Cusco again once he's banished. You can also use him to find a quick inkable card on turn 4 to get you to that valuable 5 ink in the inkwell. Make sure you run Rapunzel as a card draw tool. I know she's an obvious choice, but she's extra incredible at the moment because of how popular and powerful Steel is right now. This aggro list struggles versus strong Steel decks, and in fact, I'd say it's in danger of dropping off the list entirely because of that big weakness. And therefore, Rapunzel comes in as a valuable card that can fight back against the damage spread Steel often throws out. And finally, I run 3 copies of Mother Knows Best. The bounce back may be temporary, but sometimes that's all you need to disrupt your opponent's critical response on board and finish out that lore race. For additional deck options, this is a super solid list as it stands, but you could opt for another 5 ink target for just in time. I recommend trying out Maximus as a mid-game bodyguard choice, or Moana as a hyper aggro choice that can threaten throwing up another 3 lore while surviving a lot of removal tools from Steel with her 6 willpower. Another payment reduction card similar to Just in Time is Lantern. It's a decent option here, but I leave it out of my list because on turn 2 I'd much rather play out Simba or Flynn, and as an uninkable card it can quickly become a dead card in hand, which is devastating for this deck's momentum. And as a final consideration, there are 2 fantastic 6-cost characters. The first is Genie, who can be added or substituted in for MKB as a bounce option that can help finish out the game. His 2 lore and evasive keyword are also quite powerful. Also, John Silver can be played in a similar manner, forcing an opposing character to challenge in or sing instead of quest due to Reckless. This is similar to Genie in that it can stop the opponent from crossing that finish line for a turn or 2, which can certainly swing the game in your favor. I like to keep my list a bit lean and only rely on an inkwell of 5, but I do think both Genie and John Silver are great cards that deserve a mention and your time testing them out if you want to play this aggro deck. So that's my Lemon Lime aggro list. If you want to learn more, I have 2 videos about this deck. The first is a quick guide and gameplay video, and the second is a fun little speedrun session where I played a bunch of games in a row to showcase its power. Each of those videos covers a few variations in the list, so go check them out if you're interested. Up next, we have an Amethyst Steel control deck. This is a deck that has grown in popularity over the last couple weeks and has made some key appearances in a few different digital and in-person tournaments and has performed pretty well. It's a control deck that combines the early dominance of Steel with the late game disruption and card draw of Amethyst. Some key cards in this deck include the powerful Floodborn duo of Tinkerbell Giant Fairy and Elsa Spirit of Winter. Shifting Giant Tink in on turn 4 is a dominant turn that defines early game tactics for anyone playing with or against Steel. And Spirit of Winter Elsa can completely lock down key units in the mid to late game. This deck also utilizes Ursula as a late game quest threat, as well as Zeus as a rush unit that can respond to major characters like Cusco or Singer Ariel by himself, or if coupled with other collateral damage Steel cards like Grab Your Swords, Smash, or Giant Fairy Tink, he can take out most other major units. Once you combine these strong characters mentioned with item removal from Beast and a variety of Amethyst card draw options, the controlling power of this deck starts to come into focus. Here's a look at the full deck list. Some other cards worth noting include the incredibly effective Challenger opening that Steel brings to the table with Duelist Hook and Prince Eric. Hitting with their 3 strength can respond to many early key characters with 3 willpower, such as Simba, Hans, and Ariel. This list also runs Jetsam, who can fight back against evasive units or quietly quest himself if desired. And I've found some success with 1 copy of the Purple Tinkerbell for the same evasive purposes, and she can also function as an additional shift target for Giant Tinkerbell if needed. Adding more than 1 of her seems a little excessive because she can't be inked, but I think the single inclusion is a good one that many players overlook. Finally, Pocket Watch has to be mentioned. Other than Ruby, Steel is perhaps the best color to combine with Pocket Watch. If it's out and ready to go, placing down a Hook or Eric with Rush for 1 extra ink can feel fantastic for finishing off something on board and taking control over the game with efficiency. Let's talk deck options for the Purple Steel list. Many people run the Brooms package in their Purple Steel lists, but I've found it a bit underwhelming myself. Yes, this is a control deck, but diluting the punchiness of the Steel units slows down this deck a bit too much for my liking. Rafiki is another common choice, but I think Zeus replaces him. 4 strength allows Zeus to hit into a lot more valuable targets, and even though Rafiki feels really good on turn 3, he's a dead draw later in the game, unlike Zeus, who can bring some quest threat to the table. Another consideration are strong base stat characters like Cerberus and Sven, who can help with efficient character trades. Simba Returned King can also be added in if the meta shifts towards a lot more evasive units, which I think we might be seeing the beginnings of, and all of these strong units we just mentioned work great alongside our White Rabbit's Pocket Watch. Finally, the major consideration to add here is Dr. Facilier, either the complete 2 ink plus 7 ink package or just 2 or 3 copies of the Floodborn Provocateur. His ability to come in during the late game as a guaranteed bounce back for any challenging character is incredible. However, I've been leaving him out of my list because I don't like running that many uninkable cards, but if you can find a way to slot him in, he can be a fantastic addition to this Amethyst Steel control deck. I think there's a ton of buzz surrounding this deck, and I've even heard people say this deck has a good matchup into Amethyst Ruby control, making it the best control deck in the format. And while I do agree this deck is good and particularly great against aggro decks, I still don't think this deck gets even close to matching up with Amethyst Ruby in terms of a control matchup. I guess that's a bit of a spoiler for at least 1 deck on this list, but I think it's worth mentioning a bit about these decks and their matchups as we go through. Next up, we have one of my favorite decks, the Sapphire Steel Bell Ramp deck. This is one of my favorites because despite its combo-focused playstyle, this deck can perform pretty consistently, often resulting in explosive games due to how quickly these Sapphire ramp tools can kick in. Sapphire and Steel is a very popular ink duo, and many lists tend to throw in every possibility. In contrast, I like to keep the list simple, consistent, and effective. The core card in a Steel Bell ramp deck is Belle, of course. Many love Belle for her ability to quest for 5 lore once you reach 10 cards in the Inkwell. But her real strength comes from her less flashy ability. Once on the field, Belle allows the player to ink an additional card each turn. Combine this ability with Fishbone Quill and A Whole New World, and the combos appear. Let's ink everything in our hand and then do it again with 7 new cards. You'll soon find yourself with double the inkwell of your opponent, ready to play strong units that can control the board and quest before any response can catch up properly. I'll keep the overview top level, but if you're newer to Lorcana and haven't seen these combos yet, I have a video showing off a game using a similar bell ramp deck, so if you want to see a fun game running these combos, be sure to check that out as well. Taking a closer look, we again see steel in this list, with the early power of Hook and Eric ready to deal with early board skirmishes, while your Sapphire ramp kicks in. Hades is included as one of the best cards in the game, with removal comparable to Monstrous Dragon. His major fault is that he can't be inked, but Fishbone Quill can get around that if you need to ink him in a pinch. Typically, you'll need to do this early game before slamming a whole new world. This deck runs a couple bodyguards with Donald Duck and Mickey Mouse. They are obvious choices for protecting Belle, but with Donald's ability, they're also great tools for clearing out enemy evasive characters. Aurora is another natural choice that can also protect Belle in the late game while she quests. With Belle protected from Dragonfire and Smash, it forces a response from valuable non-targeted removal. As for alternative options, if you decide to leave out Donald and Mickey, their 4 ink and 6 ink slots can be given over to Hans and Robin Hood. Hans is a great choice for adding pressure to the board, while Robin Hood can help with card draw and hit evasive threats, similar to the Musketeer duo. Most Bell ramp lists also run Grandma Tala and One Jump Ahead. Out of the two, One Jump Ahead is probably better, so long as you find Quill so you can ink it if needed. Otherwise, it can become a dead card, especially in the late game. And Grandma Tala is just too slow for me to recommend. Often you'll spend a few rounds before you're able to attack in with her, and playing her on turn 2 rather than Eric rarely feels like a better choice. Overall, this list has surprised me quite a bit, and it's made its way into the top 3. I do think its reliance on combos makes the deck somewhat fragile, but as it stands today, I think it's consistent enough to support its sky-high potential and defeat many popular decks. And with that, we finally made it to the top 2 decks in Lorcana, and I think the gap between the top 2 and the rest of the field is quite large. And as you can see, we have the Steel Song mid-range deck. Similar Amber Steel decks have gained a ton of traction recently, and popular lists share a lot of similarities to my previous Steel Song aggro list, but the deck I have here ranked number 2 is actually quite different from most players' lists, and I think the deck list will be a bit surprising. I'll give you a solid overview here, but if you want a very detailed look at each card on the list, I've also uploaded a full guide that includes gameplay, as well as tech options, matchups, and more, all in a conversation with Ducky, who is a fantastic and smart player, who also happens to be the top-ranked Pixelborn player who pioneered this Amber Steel deck. So go dive in there if you're interested in our conversation and high-level breakdown, but for now, here's an overview of the deck. At its core, this is an efficient deck that utilizes strong individual characters in a consistent curve thanks to draw power and a very low uninkable percentage. The star of the show is the incredibly powerful Ariel, Spectacular Singer. We'll break down her specific song package in a bit, but her ability to scout for songs creates pseudo card draw that can be combined with her ability to sing 5-cost songs like Grab Your Swords right away on turn 4. Combined with cards like Rapunzel, Tinkerbell, and Surfer Stitch, this deck brings a lot of raw power and fundamentals to the table, mixing together to create one of the best decks in Lorcana. Looking at the full list, you may first notice that the deck only runs 6 uninkable cards, something you're unlikely to see in any other deck, and this is a key component of Amber Steel that I think a lot of deck builders overlook and underutilize. The sheer consistency you get with very few uninkables means this deck plays like a dream, building up strength into the mid and late game unhindered. Let's look at Ariel, Spectacular Singer, and her song package. Be Our Guest and Hakuna Matata are included almost entirely to be used as ink, while Part of Your World and Grab Your Swords can be used for their abilities. However, even Part of Your World can effectively be used as an inkable card if used to find an inkable character in the discard. Despite these uses, other than the ever-popular Grab Your Swords, these songs may seem underwhelming, but with 14 total songs, Ariel has a great chance to hit each time she's played, meaning you rarely run out of cards to ink in this deck. The deck includes other staple steel cards we've mentioned a few times today. These include Smash, Hans, and Beast for item removal. This deck also runs Cerberus as a strong 5-cost character with efficient stats, who can withstand attacks from the majority of meta threats, while also being able to trade back. He can also be used to sing Grab Your Swords as a bonus if needed. And overall, this is by far my favorite deck to play at the moment. And I think out of any deck being played, it has the best chance to knock down Amethyst Ruby control from its throne. There are countless nuances and details to cover, so I encourage you to check out my detailed guide where I'm joined by Ducky to break down every card in detail, including many different considerations and tech options. We also walk through the mulligan strategy and the deck's matchups against other top-tier decks, such as the other 4 decks in this list. I'll leave all the juicy details there for anyone interested in diving in deeper. And finally, we have what I think is still the #1 deck in the format, the Amethyst Ruby Hyper Control deck. This remains one of my most played and most tested decks, and we've seen it played a ton in many tournaments over the last few weeks. The deck has a high skill ceiling, and with that comes numerous opinions on what choices are best. So let me show off what I've been running lately. There's a few new cards that are a bit unique in my list that I've been testing out, and I'm excited to share. As a core concept, this deck aims to impose complete control over the late game, with cards like Spirit of Winter Elsa, Maleficent Monstrous Dragon, Be Prepared, and Magic Mirror. This combo of removal, disruption, and card draw leads to an unrivaled level of control that simply can't be achieved by any other ink color combo. With more card draw from Maleficent Sorceress and Friends on the Other Side, coupled with more removal from Maui and Dragonfire, this deck's strength is its near bottomless resources ready to respond to your opponent's plan. And with other cards like Aladdin combined with Shield and Pocket Watch, this deck offers alternative paths towards board control and lore gathering. Let's walk our way through the deck a bit more. For the early game, Archimedes is a simple 1-drop that can be followed up with Befuddle to hit pesky Lilos behind Simba's. Gaston is also a great turn 2, or he can be held to respond to a Cusco or other mid-game character. I include 2 copies of Magic Broom for a splash of recursion. Some players opt for a full set or add in Mickey Wayward Sorcerer for more synergy, but I like playing 2 to help in mirror matches where finding an extra dragon or being a few cards ahead in deck card count can be the difference maker. This list also includes 4 copies of Goofy Daredevil as an evasive quest threat. I actually have been preferring these over Mickey Brave Little Tailor, which seems like a wild and controversial take, but I'll compare them in a bit when I cover deck options. The inclusion of at least one evasive character like Goofy really helps fight back and win the late game lore race against Amber Steel and other mid-range decks that find themselves with a board advantage if they play around your removal smartly. Finally, I have to mention Ursula's Cauldron. Everyone loves to sing the praises of Magic Mirror, but after all this time and many games, I'm more than convinced that Cauldron is the secret sauce in this deck. Drawing a card is always great, but choice over your next card from a pair without paying any ink to do so is simply game-breaking. I still prefer running 2 of each item: Mirror, Cauldron, Shield, and Pocket Watch. My deck list here omits a few cards that many consider to be staples in Amethyst Ruby control. These include Rafiki, Jafar, the Queen, and Mickey BLT. I think all of these cards are still fantastic, and I'll often swap them in or out of the deck as needed. If you want to see a guide and gameplay that includes these choices, I have another detailed video that goes over everything here. And although today's list is a bit different and explores options ahead of the popular meta, my previous deck list and guide are far from outdated. Apologies for all the video plugs, but I like to keep this video short and quick and point outwards to more detailed resources for those interested. Rafiki is a popular choice, but the jump from Rafiki to Zeus is a natural progression, being able to take out Cusco and survive versus Hans, Simba, Ariel, and other popular cards that Rafiki would trade for. Zeus can also quickly respond to and take out an enemy Maui once they trade in. Jafar and the Queen are fantastic cards, but Zeus at a 4 cost can also cover Jafar's quest power, and Goofy takes the Queen's 5 cost character slot. That trade-off may feel a bit bad, but I think the Queen isn't quite as powerful as many players see her. Yes, her card draw is great, but at the cost of 5 plus waiting a turn and then exhausting, her card draw just isn't as quick or impactful as Maleficent, Friends, or Mirror, unless she sticks around for multiple turns, and out of dozens and dozens of games played, I'm pretty sure her average lifespan is 1 or 2 turns. Goofy flies in as a replacement for both Queen as well as Mickey BLT. Yes, Mickey quests for 4, and that can be extremely powerful in the late game, but Goofy can come out sooner, and for 2 extra ink, you can play Goofy twice instead of 1 Mickey. This is a vital difference, as Mickey will almost always eat an enemy Dragonfire or Maleficent Dragon in a mirror match, and while Goofy, by comparison, doesn't impose a perceived immediate threat, he can be just as impactful over the course of 2 turns. Smart players may recognize this and take him out, but you've likely accomplished more during your turn since he only cost 5 ink, leaving you with excess to work with. And with 4 willpower, he's only 1 down from Mickey, and he's still out of range for a single smash to take him out. That 4 willpower rather than 3 is why I prefer him over Pongo. I suppose Tigger is also worth mentioning since he is evasive and has 4 willpower, but at a cost of 6 ink, I think choosing between Goofy and Mickey is much better than the middle option. And there we have it, our number 1 deck, still on the throne at least for now. And we saw here today that there are 3 different steel lists right below it prowling in wait. And I think we may see the meta shift this month towards decks like the Amber Steel midrange list that prioritize consistency and fundamentals to fight back against big control lists like Amethyst Ruby. But for now, these are my top 5 meta decks, and I love the diversity we see here in playstyle, another testament to the great game design found in Lorcana. Well guys, let me know your thoughts on these deck lists. I'll also leave links in the description to each of these decks on Dreamborn Inc. so you can import these over and try them out yourselves. If you have any specific questions, drop them in the comments. I check through every day and respond to everyone if I can. Let me know what your top 5 decks are. Perhaps your deck will find itself on the next meta update. And finally, please go support Lorcana and your local game stores. I know it's tough at the moment to buy a lot of product, but even picking up a starter deck and teaching someone the game at a game store is a great way to help grow the community and support this game that we love. Thanks for watching. See you next time.